Welcome to the Procurement Software Podcast, where we aim to educate and inspire you about how technology is changing and shaping our profession. The truth is, there's never been a more exciting time to be in procurement, but only if you're one of those organizations that's embracing the change and driving new developments. And this podcast is all about giving you the tools to help you get there. So buckle up and let's get right into this week's show. Well, hello there, and a very warm welcome to this episode of the show. My name is James Meads. I'm your host today, and we're going to be looking at why A players must lead digital transformations. A lot of talk out there about the people factor and how it's hard to find the right talent, especially around how it's hard to find the right talent to lead and implement digital procurement tools and digital transformations especially within large procurement teams. So going to look today at some of the factors around why I think you need an A player to do this. And then the second part of the episode, I'm going to focus on some of the factors that you can look at and concentrate on to ensure that you indeed do get an A player to do it. So two kind of sub-segments to this show today. And then finally, I'm going to throw a bit of a joker or a wild card in at the end and suggest a possible alternative of how you could approach this. So let's get started. Well, why do you need an A player? Well, you need an experienced and savvy change manager. And what's more, you need them to have extensive people and communication skills. But on top of that, they also need to understand technology, and they also need to have a solid grounding of what represents good user experience in a solution provider. So I'm going to tell you what you definitely should not do. Please don't, for the love of all things holy, give this task to a category manager on top of their day job and package it as a development opportunity with, maybe a feigned inclination that they might get a promotion at the end of it. That's the absolute worst thing that you can do, trust me. So why do you need an A player then? So there are a few things that I'm going to focus down on here. There are 5 in total. First one is user adoption. So you need someone that understands how user interface or user experience impacts the end user adoption. If you've not got someone that's managing this who is strong enough to push back on perhaps some of the influence that a CPO or a CIO is trying to exert in terms of their preferences or thoughts around the service provider that they want to bring in, then that is a big mistake, because ultimately they're going to be influenced by the big players in the market, either because of who your ERP solution provider is, and maybe they want to go with a single source for everything. Especially, I hear CIOs often want to take that approach. CPOs may have a vested interest to implement one of the big players because it's a nice juicy thing that they can put on their CV, especially when they're looking for their next role, to say, hey, I oversaw an end-to-end implementation of insert legacy source-to-pay suite provider. So understanding user adoption and UI UX is key. That's number one. Number 2 is someone who is effective at internal communications. You need someone who is able to put this first and to be able to do a really good forward-thinking internal comms campaign. So what I'm essentially saying here is you need a project manager who's got extensive marketing skills, which is not easy to find in your internal team, I suspect. And likewise, they're not that easy to find externally if you're trying to do it on the cheap. Let me just be completely clear. Internal comms does not mean putting a policy or a training guide on SharePoint, or maybe sending out a blanket email invitation to 2 or 3 onboarding Teams or Zoom calls, and then just washing your hands of it and thinking, right, okay, that's done. Next. It doesn't work like that. You need someone that's a real internal communications expert, preferably someone that has some experience of working in a marketing role. I would almost say, but with obviously extensive project management and change management skills in addition. So not that easy, right? Kind of linked into this is number 3, which is you need someone that is very, very effective at stakeholder management. And hat tip here to Tom Mills, who you've probably come across on LinkedIn if any of you spend any time on LinkedIn. Tom is a friend and is a great guy actually who talks a lot of common sense around how procurement really need to get better at their soft skills. And hands up, I'm guilty as charged that I often didn't have the best repertoire of soft skills back when I was a procurement practitioner. I'm getting better slowly but surely. But my point here is that you need a diplomat. You need someone that's able to navigate the political landscape and who can influence and persuade sometimes, let's face it, quite hostile stakeholders when you want to bring in some changes. So not only do you need someone that understands the tech and the project management side, you also need someone who is a people person. And just like the internal comms part, it's not easy to find someone internally that necessarily has that skill set with the technical knowledge of procurement technology too. Especially, and if you're going externally, if your salary range is not very realistic, again, you're going to have the same issue. Number 4, don't just consider this as another side project that you need to staff. Digitalization of procurement isn't a one-off task like something like, let's say, readiness for GDPR in the EU or REACH chemical legislation is. Just like I like to compare this to sustainability initiatives, this is going to be a long road ahead, and it's going to require a shift change in the way that procurement works as a department and how they are perceived to the wider business. And I think sustainability and technology kind of go hand in hand there, that it's going to be a marathon, not a sprint. And they're both going to fundamentally change the way that we work and the way that we are perceived by the wider business. And then number 5 of why you need an A player to do this is it's simply a project that's too big to fail. This is almost certainly going to be the biggest project that you as a procurement leader or a center of excellence leader are going to undertake in terms of the need for cross-functional alignment and the potential to significantly raise the profile of the function. Think of this a little bit like how politics works. Prime ministers or presidents rarely choose their B and C players to be finance ministers or foreign ministers, because those roles are typically the most important roles that a president or a prime minister has in their cabinet. And there are some exceptions. There are a couple of finance ministers or foreign ministers out there in the world that I would potentially not view as being A players. I'm not going to name them, but you can probably guess them if you think hard enough. But the point is, this is going to be one of, if not the most important roles that are not procurement director roles. So you need to staff this with somebody who is director caliber, even if they don't have that job title. So let's move on now to look at how do you ensure that you get one of these A players? Well, number 1, perhaps unsurprisingly, is salaries. Let's be honest, good people aren't cheap, are they? It's better to hire one top quality person than to have to replace an average person that you've hired halfway through a transformation project. Trying to be cheap and cutting costs at the outset is going to come back and bite you on the backside further down the road. So especially if you consider any project time slippages and the impact that might have on the ROI or on potential savings that you're missing out on, not to mention also the recruitment fees on top if you're going out and hiring externally. If you hire the wrong person and then have to replace them halfway through the project, that's going to cost you more than going out and getting the best person for the job right at the very beginning. Number 2 is your recruitment strategy. Don't leave the job description to HR. Don't let them anywhere near it. You need to make this an engaging role if you want to attract the best people. So don't fill your job description with boring, vanilla, corporate language in your job description. Make it engaging. If need be, get some support from your marketing team to help you to write the job ad. if you've got someone in your marketing team or even an external agency that they use for things like sales copywriting or website copy, see if you can engage them to write a really exciting job ad that will make sure that you're oversubscribed in terms of the number of people applying for the role that meet the criteria. Number 3 is you need to consider international experience and possibly also language capabilities when you're going out and recruiting or maybe even selecting an internal candidate for this role. If it's an international implementation, especially if a significant number of users are not senior level users and maybe they're using software in their native language, look at where your biggest pool of users is going to be outside of English speaking countries and look at if you can get someone that speaks near native level of that language. So, let's say if you've got a lot of users in Latin America that will need to adopt this new digital procurement tool, you maybe want to hire someone that speaks fluent Spanish because inevitably, especially if you're having more junior roles that would need to use the system, you're going to need to bring them on board and get user adoption. And if you're putting all of your documentation out in English, or even if you have the software that's not able to provide the Spanish language user experience and user interface, it doesn't take a genius to work out that you're probably going to struggle. So having someone that speaks that language and that can implement and drive that change within that language where you have the most users outside of your English user base is going to be key. And then also another thing to consider in terms of the whole internationalization of the implementation is how are you going to deal with more consensual or bottom-up business cultures if your organization or your background typically is very hierarchical and top-down as a company, and vice versa for that matter. You're going to need someone with the change management skills and the international culture skills, culture awareness skills to be able to navigate that complex environment, which again is why you need someone that is highly experienced in doing this type of thing. Then the next one is autonomy. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but really what I'm saying here is don't be a micromanager. Whoever you bring in, if they're at a pretty senior level, will not expect to have to go out and get approval for every small detail that you're trying to do. So if you're hiring a top performer, then give them the autonomy to make decisions without having to go and get approval each time. Next up is flexibility. So if this is going to be something that's going to require a pretty hands-on approach, you're going to need someone that's willing and able to get their hands dirty and to respond to the occasional crisis or urgent requirement which might crop up. If you're hiring someone who is more comfortable sitting in a head office and delegating everything, that's probably not going to work. You're going to need a hands-on person that's got the strategic and the political skills as well, but that can also muck in and deal with something if they need to be more hands-on. So on top of the soft skills and the tech knowledge and the marketing capabilities, you're going to need someone that's got a bit of a grind mentality or a startup mentality in them too. And then finally is career progression. If you're going to hire someone internally for this role, then if they do a good job, then that person is probably going to expect a promotion. I mean, let's be honest, digital transformations are not easy. So if you hire an internal person to do this and they nail it and they do a fantastic job, what's their next role? If you don't have a role from them to step up to as part of your succession planning, you're probably going to lose them. So be careful about what you're promising them. Don't string them along and say, hey, at the end of this, there'll be a new role if you know that that's not true. Don't deceive them. And then the same applies if you're hiring externally. If you're looking to fill this role externally, what are they going to do at the end of the project? It's pretty unlikely that they're going to be happy then moving into a frontline global category manager or category lead type of role if they've managed this big complex project. So you need to have that in mind. And this kind of brings me on then to the final part of the podcast, which is, well, what's the alternative? And if you don't have something that you can offer them at the end of the project, then why not look at hiring an interim manager or a freelance consultant to do this? And yes, they're going to cost more typically they're paid on a day rate, right? So if you're hiring in an interim manager to do this, their day rate is typically going to be higher than what a salaried employee's prorated day rate would be, because they're carrying all of the risk of them being freelance contractors. But it's better to have someone that knows what they're doing, even if they're only working 2 to 3 days a week and they're on a higher rate, than having a B or C player on a full-time salary. They will get more done in 2 or 3 days a week, even if you're paying them a higher day rate, than what an average player would do if they're on payroll. So it's a bit of a false economy to maybe think you just want a bum on a seat 5 days a week. That's not how it works. If you want an experienced person, pay them what they're worth and just say, hey, just come and work for us 2 days a week. And if you've got another client that wants you to do another 2 days a week, that's great. And both you and the freelance contractor are going to be happy with that arrangement and are more likely to succeed than trying to hire someone on the cheap just because you want someone 5 days in the office with their bum on a chair. It doesn't work that way anymore. The gig economy and niching down and subject matter expertise isn't cheap, but the return on investment that you'll get will be higher. So I would say that if you're not able to offer career progression, or if you don't have the budget to go out and hire someone full-time to do this, consider taking external support on a part-time basis and just be realistic with what you can pay versus what the interim contractor's day rate is, and make sure that it's a win-win for both parties. The amount of hours that are worked is kind of irrelevant. It's the end result that matters. And a lot of times I think corporate organizations tend to forget this and tend to have this very fixed mindset that everything should be staffed by permanent employees that are working 5 days a week. The economy is changing, the world is changing, and it doesn't work like that anymore. So you definitely need to approach this from a different mindset and start to think outside of the box, a little bit more like a business owner, if you will, and think, how can I get the best value for money? And that doesn't necessarily mean someone sat doing a job in the office 5 days a week. So that is, in a nutshell, why you need A players and why A players must lead digital transformations, and some tips and tricks around how to recruit and retain and get the best ones. Thank you very much for listening. If you're curious about what's out there in terms of the tech landscape, or if you're curious about how you should approach this from the outset, we have tech maps that you can download completely for free if you go to store.procurementsoftware.site. Go there and you can download whatever you want to get from there in our tech maps completely free of charge. And if you just want to have a chat around how we could potentially help you on the upstream part of understanding the market and what solution providers are out there, book a call with me. The link to book a call to schedule a slot is in the show notes. And I offer free 30-minute initial consultation because every single potential client is different in terms of their needs and requirements. And there is no one-size-fits-all approach to sourcing and selecting the right procurement software. Yes, of course, we charge for advice beyond that, but ultimately, I need to get to know you a little bit before we can evaluate whether or not we're a good fit to work together. So look forward to talking to you if you're interested to have a chat. I will catch you again, same time next week. So take care wherever you are in the world listening to this, and bye for now.